Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. This being the beginning of season 2, episode 1. Here we are. It's kind of different than saying just an episode number.
It's a little bizarre. It's true. Instead of just like episode blank, it's like, no, season blank episode. Yeah, it's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually haven't even practiced the whole like intro piece. So for so long, it's been welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number blah blah blah. So now it's going to be welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast. This is this is season 2, episode 1. Jeez, such a weird. Yeah, Mark's like season 2. Bro, did you miss episode 500? We kind of announced some stuff. Yep. We'll probably refresh everybody's memories once I begin recording the audio portion of today's episode, because I recognize it. I recognize that many listeners may not have listened to episode 500. That happens. So we'll remind you of how things are going to be done now. All right. Yes, all past episodes were season 1.
All 500 of them.
Longest season ever.
Yep. Go binge watch that one.
Well, should we begin today's official podcast, Jacob?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. A reminder: you may have to cover for me on without notice if I have to cough.
I will try and pay attention.
Like right now. All right, I'm trying to make sure I get all the coughing out of my system for a little bit. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 2, Episode 1. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman. Oh, I forgot. Brought to you by... Shoot.
I was wondering if we were going to throw that in later. Or...
Yeah, well, yeah.
Easier to start over, I guess.
We have a title sponsor now, guys. So a little different in the... everything's changed about the intro as far as I'm concerned. Here we go. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, and brought to you by XS Sites. I am your host, Riley Bowman. Today is Wednesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, as people like to point out, a silly American holiday. And today's co-host and co-founder of All Things Awesome, Jacob Paulson.
Yep. You know, people make fun of us, but in my experience, which is personal and direct, countries in Latin America for which we think Cinco de Mayo is credited, they also look for any excuse to have a party at a holiday.
Yes. Yep. Anyway, we hope everybody's having a great time and that you are safe partying or not partying wherever you may be. Today's episode is sponsored by laserapp.com, makers of the fine Laser X software, which is my choice for dry fire training software. We're going to talk about that some today as we discuss today's topic. And also today's episode sponsored by Next Level Training, makers of the fine SIRT pistols. In fact, I've got the P320 model right here. So, yes, get your SIRT pistol. I got Glock style models, P320 style, M&P style, and
be prepared to wait for a while for it to be shipped to you.
They are still significantly back ordered, but the soonest you're going to get one is to place an order and wait, because you can wait hoping the back order will vanish. but it doesn't seem to be going away, at least anytime in the near future.
Nope.
So this whole COVID-19 situation has impacted all of us in some form or fashion. Many of us, it's impacted our businesses, and Next Level Training is one of those that's been impacted in their ability to produce SIR pistols. But we are still we still love them, and we love the SIR pistols, and we are thankful for them being sponsors not only of this episode, but of the program, if you will, that the series, if you will, that this episode is sponsored by, which is the and sponsored or inspired by, would be the better word, which is Shooter Ready Challenge. And the most recent Shooter Ready Challenge video was published last week. That is our once a month dry fire training video that we put out on shooterreadychallenge.com. And I would encourage you, I mean, basically the whole idea there is to give you guys ideas and tips and suggestions and ways to do dry fire practice. What I found in my early days of doing dry fire is I tended to only do like one thing and do it a lot. And the reality is there's a lot of different aspects of carrying a pistol, of shooting a pistol, of drawing a pistol, all those sorts of things that can be practiced in dry fire, and that we shouldn't get sort of, what one-dimensional in our dry fire practice. We should try to vary it and practice all sorts of things, and there's lots of opportunities to do so, but sometimes coming up with those ideas and ways of doing so is not always readily apparent to us. So Shooter Ready Challenge, I hope, is or can be an inspiration for you on how to work on your dry fire. So that's
the best way to tag along is just go to shooterreadychallenge.com. And on that webpage, you can see all the past Shooter Ready challenges. And to your point, our hope is that you would say, oh, okay, like what am I going to do for my dry fire practice this week or this month? And you would use this video that we're publishing, that Riley's filming, and that we're publishing as a company, as a way to be inspired on something you can go do for a week or a month even of your dry fire practice. And if you're just now becoming aware of it, you got a pretty good archive, more than a year's worth of those videos that you can go reference. You could, follow along with one of those each week for a while if you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's a pretty decent archive now. That's true. Yeah. If you're just getting started, I mean, as I count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 18, 19 videos.
Yeah. October 2019, I think, was the first one. So it's we've been rolling for a while.
Yep. And we generally try to roll those out or release the new ones about the middle of the month, like about the 15th of the month. Sometimes we're a little bit behind. This last one was especially so because I couldn't get in to get that filmed where I was quarantined due to having COVID-19. Anyway, so that reminds me, I got to film Maze like next week.
Yes, you do.
Anyway, so let me just kind of provide some context and sort of introduce to you today's topic, and also kind of the way I approached this in this most recent Shooter Ready Challenge video. So type 1 malfunctions, as they're sometimes called, also failure to fire type malfunctions. And what it is, if we were to define a type 1 malfunction very simply, is it's any time we press the trigger and there's a click instead of a bang. And that's unique and has a distinctive difference from some other malfunctions where you might have a dead trigger, which usually is a sign that the gun is out of battery, which would indicate that we've had a failure to eject or a failure to extract or something to that effect. So type 1 malfunction or failure to fire malfunction is very simple in that either we have something in the chamber, around in the chamber, that for whatever reason doesn't go bang. That could be because it's a bad round. It could also be gun related in that maybe your firing pin broke, or there's debris in your firing pin channel causing the striker or firing pin to not go forward at its normal velocity, or could be some other things. But generally speaking, it is a bad round, bad primer type situation, or we don't have anything in the chamber at all, meaning that you thought you had a loaded gun, but the reality is you did not. Empty chamber, you pressed trigger, it went click, and you're like, oh snap. So that is essentially a failure to fire malfunctions. Anytime we intend to go bang, but it goes click instead of bang. So that's the focus of the shooter raid challenge, and also of this episode today, is we're going to break down these types of malfunctions. But then I'll just kind of give the caveat that this latest episode of Shooter Raid Challenge is a little bit different in that I just took a little bit different approach, and it was really a way to show you how you could train type 1 malfunctions, but also gather some data from it using laser app software. And in this case, I use the Laser X version, not the classic software. I like the Laser X version. I love running it on my iPad, for instance. And that data that we can garner from that is very useful, because we can actually practice type 1 malfunctions and measure the time that it takes for us to accomplish them. And in the most simplest form, typically in a live fire situation, you would have a bad round or an empty chamber, and you would press trigger and get a click, and then you would clear the malfunction, and then you get a bang. In this case, it's a little bit different the way I set it up using the software, because I really wanted to measure the time between when I press a trigger and get the so-called click to the time that took me to solve the malfunction and then get what would be in live fire a bang, but in this case it's simply another click. And in both cases, I have a laser dot trainer from Ready Up Gear in the chamber of the gun, which both times I get a laser shot on target. Okay, so that initial click and then the second click after clearing the malfunction, and that is a very precise measurement of time of how long clearing the malfunction took. So that was that was the concept.
And I love this. When I watched the Shooter Raid Challenge, I was like, yeah, this is really clever, because I think sometimes we forget that there are tools out there that allow us to, from a very analytical perspective, determine the speed at which something can be accomplished. It reminded me, and I'm not going to get into the detail, but many moons ago, I did a study where I used LASR to determine which types of gun safes were faster to open to get the gun out from on the nightstand, as you're sleeping, Right. I just set up the software, you get to go beep. I jump out of the bed, open the safe, grab the gun, and then press a trigger. And boom, laser would give me that analytical, data to know, well, how fast was that? And if I do enough repetitions, you take the average. So I that reminded me of what you did, because to your point, what you were looking at was, let's establish a baseline of how fast it takes me to clear the malfunction. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the malfunction clearing in a moment. But then not only establish a baseline for how long it takes me to clear that malfunction, but then experiment with some other methodologies to clear the malfunction and determine if they're faster or not for me as an individual. And I think that this is an important journey, because I think that you've come to a pretty specific personal, clarity as to what methods you prefer and why. But I think that the Shooter Raid Challenge, you frame it up in such a way so as to encourage someone to embark on that journey for themselves and determine what works best for them, both mechanically in terms of consistency, but also in terms of efficiency and speed.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. That was what I hoped to get from it. And part of that is almost out of necessity, because for me to be true to myself, to be intellectually honest, if I was to do a type 1 malfunction based video, I would do it differently than how most other people would do it, and kind of the more general industry accepted practice would be, meaning your tap rack, meaning tap magazine, and most people and a lot of instructors would teach like overhand grip the slide, all four fingers on there, meat of the palm, rack the slide that way. I've changed away from that. That's where I used to be. So for me, it's like, well, this is how I do it. And there's a very specific reason why I do it and why I've evolved this way. But that may not be what you want to do or what you think is best for you. And so, but let's put it all on a timer and measure these things all out, because the timer is what doesn't lie, right? Like we can perceive, well, that was pretty fast. That's, see, and the trick here is you might try different techniques to solve a particular problem, but if you're not putting them on the timer, it's almost impossible, especially if you're just working alone. But even when you have somebody watching you, speed is a relative thing, and it can be really challenging to judge things accurately. Like there's plenty of times I watch somebody shoot a build drill, like the class I was teaching this last weekend. I remember a student running a build drill, and I thought, wow, that was pretty spicy. Like I felt like it was pretty close to a 2-second run, but then I was surprised when I looked at the timer and saw it was like 2:56 or something, and I was like, yeah, and that's why it's good to use actual measurement tools and not just rely on our senses or our feel. And so why this is important when it comes to testing and determining best methods for ourselves to solve various problems is that I could solve a type 1 malfunction the very classical way of doing it, and then compare it to this other whatever method that is arguably faster. But in the moment as I test those two, it's like, well, this classical method of solving a type 1 still seems plenty fast, so I'm just going to stick with that. Well, that's not an accurate way of looking at it. If the numbers are, if the actual speed of doing something is important to you, if speed is important to you, then it's important you actually measure it with something that's not biased.
So I think we need to talk about, both your overhand versus slingshot thing. I think we also need to talk about tapping the mag or not. I think we also need to talk about whether or not your red dot is a contributing factor. And we also need to kind of talk about, speed, but if we get speed, but we lose consistency or effectiveness, then that's another concern too. So those are all things I think we have to hash out to really do this topic justice. But just in case anyone's watching and some of these things feel like they're out of context, can I take a second, Riley, and create the baseline?
Yep.
So I think you already defined this a little bit, just to make sure that we start off on the foundation here. When we talk about malfunctions, we're talking about things that cause the gun to not work. Generally as an industry, we refer to three categories of malfunctions. They're generally referred to as type 1, type 2, and type 3. And in this particular conversation, we're talking about type 1 malfunctions, failure to fire. So you go to press the trigger, you get a click, but no bang. Firing pin is coming forward, but we're not getting a bullet exiting the muzzle. So traditionally, probably a lot of times it's a bad round. Something's wrong with that actual ammunition itself. It's not firing. Could be a variety of magazine issues. We could have that the mag is not fully seated. Could be that there's some sort of spring hang up thing going on in there and it's not feeding the ammunition properly. Could be that the chamber was empty. That the magazine was charged into the gun, but the slide was not cycled and a round was never loaded into the chamber. All those things are called the type 1 malfunction. So the traditional kind of, for a long time now, industry best practice methodology is to tap and racket. And when we say tap and racket, we mean tap with a good solid, meaty part of your hand, the base of the magazine, the mag plate itself. This, in theory, would ensure that it's both fully seated, and maybe if there's something screwy going on in there with the spring, it would loosen that up and cause it to now feed ammunition to the top of the magazine correctly. And then to reach over the top of the slide and rack the slide, cycle it as traditionally would be done. And most people would generally think that the most efficient or accurate or consistent, reliable method to do so is what we would call an overhand technique, where you're essentially pinching the slide with the fingers, 4 fingers on one side, and the meaty part of your palm on the other side, and that's how you're pulling it to the rear. So tap, rack, and release has for a long time been the traditional best practice to clear that type 1 malfunction. So there you go, Riley. How'd I do on laying the groundwork here?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let's start with your decision to forego tapping.
Yeah. So first of all, let's also create some additional context, and let's just talk in terms of, I'm going to start first with What we teach actually at concealedcarry.com in our classes, in my classes, as far as firearm safety rules, and the very first safety rule as we teach it is know the condition of your firearm and always treat it as a potentially dangerous tool. So this first rule is really important. And so I know that classically the firearm safety rules are like something along the effects of, all guns are loaded, or treat all firearms as though they're loaded, or something to that effect. And those rules have served us well just fine. But we shook it up a little bit to apply a safety rule to as many situations and conditions as possible. So the idea is that when I want my gun to be unloaded, I need to know the condition that it is in fact unloaded. And when I want my gun loaded, meaning that I'm carrying this thing for defense, it should be in a loaded and ready to use condition. I need to know that fact. So why I kind of divert slightly on that little bit of tangent, Jacob, is that the context here is that, number one, before I carry a gun each day, I check and confirm the condition of it. So I check every day that I have a loaded magazine inserted into the gun. I check that I have a round chambered because I carry chambered, and I want to know that it is in fact chambered. I have made the mistake of carrying unchambered when I intended it to be chambered because I was doing dry fire practice and failed to actually follow through on reloading up the gun. And went on an entire day carrying a gun that, had I needed to use it that day, I guarantee you I would have drawn and pressed the trigger and got a click instead of a bang. Okay. So the first part of the context here, as I view it and how I do things now, is that, number one, I've gotten to a place because of mistakes made in the past where I always check and confirm and know the condition of my firearm before I put it in a holster and carry it on my body. So I have good confidence and reason to believe that I'm first starting with a loaded magazine that is fully inserted into the gun. It's chambered. It's in a condition that I desire it to be, ready for use. And then it is inserted into a holster that, through experience, I know there is no chance of my magazine release being depressed while it's in the holster. And so I know that until the next time this gun comes out of the holster, that my magazine's inserted and it's locked in place, and that's not changing. All right. Now I can hear, by the way, we've got a pretty good thunderstorm going over me right now. So if I lose internet connectivity, just a heads up. Anyway,
it's moving north to south, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm with you, by the way. And this is new to me. I haven't always done this. This is very new to me, relatively. Like maybe only the last 6 months or so. Since we really adopted those new safety rules, I thought, this is a really good point. So now my rule is similar. Every time the gun goes in the holster, that's my rule. If the gun goes into the holster, whether I'm just at the range I got done shooting it or I'm loading up for the morning, whatever it is, anytime I'm going to put the gun in the holster, I do the function check, right? I remove magazine, check, make sure it's fully loaded, push on the top to make sure the spring is good, insert it into the gun, pull on it to make sure that it's fully seated, then press check it, then make sure that the slide is all the way forward in battery, and then reinsert into the holster. That's just I do that now. That's what I do. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, in theory, then, assuming also, to your point, that the holster, I don't have to worry about the holster potentially hitting my mag release, I should just have a pretty high degree of confidence that my magazine is fully seated.
Yes. Yep.
And that it's feeding ammunition.
That's right. So, and by the way, what you just said there and what I described as far as like checking your equipment every day, to me, that's just the mark of a responsible gun carrier. Like, and again, that's, for me, that's come purely from experience. And by experience, meaning I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. So you implement strategies and ways of avoiding or limiting those mistakes in the future. Anyway, so, all right, that's that first piece. So I assume, and I think very logically and rightfully so, that the next time that gun comes out of my holster, should I need to use it, my mag is inserted, it's locked in place. Okay. So then here's the other thing. If I get a failure to fire malfunction during a string of fire, meaning I fired already 3 or 4 shots and all of a sudden get click instead of bang. Well, here's one thing that we can tell that tells us Well, I was able to fire 3 or 4 shots already, or 2, or however many it is. That tells me magazine was feeding ammo. So it's probably not the result of the magazine coming loose. See what I'm going with that? So
Yeah, I mean,
that's how
I'll be a devil's advocate real quick and
Sure.
say that I have absolutely definitely seen shooters on a firing line where in the course of fire they have hit their own mag release unknowingly so.
And that's where this becomes and that's why I don't say you must use this technique because it's better, faster, and more efficient. This is something that you need to determine is the right thing for you. Okay. I'm to a point and to a level and have shot X number of tens of thousands of rounds over the last few years and have developed my grip and everything in such a way that it just doesn't happen. The way I grip my pistol, there is a lot of space between my hand and where the magazine release is. So that's where this becomes a personal decision. Is this the right thing for you? So I know that based on my gun, my grip, the way I shoot, my experience, et cetera, that is an extreme remote possibility. Like so the one gun that's happened to me on is the P365. And that I have fixed because I've changed my grip even from that point when I had that issue because I wanted to solve it from being an issue. And the way I changed my grip to prevent the P365 from having that issue with the way I grip the gun has actually made my grip even more risk averse in terms of hitting the mag release accidentally on my full size 320, which is the primary gun I carry for defense now. So all of that to say that for me, I have eliminated the tap from the tap rack part of clearing the type 1 malfunction because I believe it is unnecessary based on all that I gave you. And so what does that do? Well, it eliminates at least 2/10, if not more. And at the speed that I run these manipulations, and you can watch the whole Shoot Ready Challenge video and see, the speed that I run these manipulations at, which are all right around second or under a second, sometimes significantly so. My fastest manipulations clearing a type 1 malfunction without the tap are like just over a half second, which is pretty spicy. So for me, there's no tap. It's simply if I get a click instead of bang, rack slide. And that's where I'm at these days with clearing a type 1. So is that the right choice for you? Again, you've got to determine that for you. And part of that may be because of your gun, your equipment, the way you carry, your level of experience, whether you're confident or not that you actually get magazines fully inserted, et cetera. But your part of your decision could or should perhaps be based upon efficiency of operations as well, or at least it should be consideration. And that's where we get into this Shooter Ready Challenge for April, which of course now it's May. But anyway, so that's what I do in that video is, well, let's test the classical way of solving this. I do the overhand technique. Then I do tap rack with what's more of like a pinch or slingshot type method of working the slide, which I have adopted more in recent history. And by recent history, in the last year and a half, 2 years, thereabouts. Occasionally I still find myself do the old overhand, but that's because that's been, it just sometimes happens, it's programmed in the brain from years and years and years ago. But I have all my dry fire work these days. When I rack the slide, it's either pinching the rear of the slide between thumb and forefinger, or it's pinching the slide between the web of my hand on the front serrations of the slide. And in all honesty, both of those techniques are totally acceptable to me. And if I do one versus the other, the time difference is not significant. We're talking 1/10 of a second, and they equally perform well for me. So, sorry.
Yep.
Long answer, but that's the logic, how I've evolved.
And I think that's solid, right? I mean, the takeaway here is there's a traditional way of doing this, and Riley has made the determination based on, his level of comfort, his level of skill, his own analytical testing, recognizing, the difference in efficiency and speed, and all those other things that he said. He's made that decision that's how he's going to do this now. To each their own, right? But understanding that it's potentially an option if you can also check some of those same boxes. I think is valuable because it's both more efficient and and faster, and some of that is the same and some of that is different. So what about you started to get into this, testing the over the hand, pinch between the palm and the four fingers technique versus the slingshot style, just between the thumb and the knuckle kind of idea stuff. So you ran this, so you have a sense for how much faster one is over the other. Like what was your takeaway?
So my takeaway is that between the overhand method, pinching all four fingers in the meaty part of the palm on the rear of the slide, compared to running the slingshot or pinch technique, is that the slingshot or pinch technique is about 0.2 of a second faster typically for me. That may not seem like much, but hey, 0.2 is 0.2. That's enough time for me, especially, at least one more shot in the context of things. That means I get back on target one shot sooner. If we kind of think in terms of split times between shots, and that might be the difference maker. It might not, but it might be. So that's where efficiency is important. And here's the other thing to consider. We think, well, if a malfunction happens, it happens, and I just need to have a reliable technique to solve the malfunction and get back into the fight. And what happens, happens. Oh well. But I'm always thinking in terms of efficiency, because if I have a malfunction, what just occurred is that my gun has stopped being a gun. It's turned into a brick. And until I solve that and get it back to being a gun, that's all downtime where I am not able to engage the target or threat. So any moment in time that we have a gun that's not a gun when we need a gun, that's problematic. And I want to solve it as efficiently as possible. So I'm always looking for more efficient techniques. And those techniques also need to be reliable for me. So let's talk a little bit about the different techniques of grasping the slide. Again, a lot of folks and instructors even these days are teaching kind of the overhand, all four fingers on the slide, meaty part of the palm on the back side of the slide. And the logic there is, well, that's a lot of contact on the slide, and it's therefore more secure and more reliable. I agree there's a certain logic there, but I think there's also an interesting converse logic. And this was honestly, my eyes were opened to this by when I first attended a Dave Spalding course. And Dave teaches roll the gun inboard so you're bringing the slide closer to your support hand because you're turning it basically into your support hand. And he says, grasp it like so many other things in our lives that we grasp. Like if you're grasping a rope, if you're pulling a rope, you don't grab it reverse with your hands like this because you get more contact or something like that, because that doesn't work as efficiently with your muscles in your body. The example I really like that he pointed out is if I was to dangle a $100 bill in your face and challenge you, hey, if you're fast enough, if you can grab this $100 bill, it's yours. Think about how you would grab it. Would you go for all four fingers and palm and try to snatch that out of his hand like this? Or would you grab it more like, I don't know, like you're
you
grabbing
hold a golf club or a baseball bat.
Exactly. That's a good example, actually. And that's a great point too. Like how we grab a golf club, a baseball bat, a hammer, and things of this nature. Where a lot of times we grasp with the four fingers. That's true, but the thumb is usually placed on top, and it might be wrapped around too. But a lot of times we do this, right? So the thumb's placed on top of the index finger, and the reality is that we're actually quite strong in being able to grasp things that way. Okay, I'm not saying the other way is not that the other way is wrong. Okay, I'm just saying, what if grasping the slide this way by pinching it between my thumb and my forefinger can be as effective, especially with practice? That's what I'm suggesting here. I'm not trying to say that this other way is wrong or that it doesn't work. I'm just saying, what if? there's another way we can do it and still be effective. And if it makes things more efficient, then there's something there to that. And that's where I've gotten to. And the other thing is, a lot of times people think in terms of, well, I'm just grabbing it between my thumb and my index finger. That's not true. That's not the right way. You're actually putting thumb all the way down the slide, and then on the opposite side, you've got your entire index finger engaged, and even part into the web of it. Like, you're actually engaging pretty much all this material between thumb down through the web and all the way down the index finger, if you're doing it correctly. And so you actually get a lot of contact. And it's something that's a very natural motion that can be quite strong. Now, some people might not find it as strong for them. Again, this is where you need to understand your personal needs. So anyway, that's kind of the logic between that. And again, by turning the gun into the support hand and racking it that way, conversely to that, the other method, I have to bring my support hand up over the slide in kind of an awkward, orientation of sorts, and work it that way, and then bring the hand back down and around and get back on the grip. You see, one is just we have a shorter distance of travel when we do the slingshot technique versus the overhand technique.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
what if any impact does your red dot have? If someone's listening to this and if they were to go watch the Shoot Ready Challenge, which I just did, and they see you running all these different variations of clearing the malfunction, and you're calling out the time. Oh, that was 0.9 seconds. So that one was 0.7 seconds. This was point whatever. Yeah. Our average was this. And if they see all this and say, well, yeah, but you have this red dot, and when we're talking about racking a slide, regardless of overhand or slingshot technique, that red dot is playing a part.
Yes.
Of this, for the better, for the worse,
like a big ledge to grab.
Yeah, onto. Exactly. So what? I guess does red dot help or not? Which I think the answer is an obvious yes. But does it help more in one of those methodologies than the other?
I would say that when I could testify to that right in the Shoot Ready Challenge video this last month, where whether I'm going overhand technique or the slingshot pinch technique, both of those get increased engagement because of the red dot being there. I can feel it. I can feel, because in the one hand, when I go overhand, the edge of the frame, the window, if you will, of that red dot kind of digs into my palm. And when I go pinch technique, I'm basically hooking my thumb slightly on the edge of it as well. So they both get increased engagement because of the red dot being there, which is an interesting advantage / pro that could be mentioned about, hey, having a red dot on your pistol means you can manipulate it a little bit easier, which is not something that's often actually mentioned as a benefit of having red dot.
Well, and I'm thinking about non-traditional slide racking too. So think about when you're doing like a one-handed clearance or one-handed whatever thing you're doing where you have to rack in the slide, right? And you're
able to hook it on your belt or your pocket,
super easy
on the edge of something a lot easier. We got to be mindful of things like is there always a potential if I'm like smashing my red dot into a concrete corner of a wall, like that's probably not best practice. We'd like to think that our red dots are tough enough to be able to handle that, but we need to be realistic about things. But it does give me other opportunities for easier manipulation.
And some guns that would be a bigger deal than others, like just by nature of the way stock sights are often shaped. We've seen a lot of guns on the range that the stock sights are pretty aggressive in allowing you to hook them onto something and rack that slide with it. Where we've seen other guns where it's the inverse. The sights are almost designed to make it impossible to hook them onto something and rack. So I'm thinking the I don't know about the new shield, but the original Smith & Wesson shields, those M&P shields, the stock sights they just had this sloping motion that just made it impossible to hook that sucker on and lack. We've had students who've worked that one over. So anyway, just another little side note about we're talking about racking a slide and the influence that the red dot has on making that easier. Definitely a big deal when you're trying to do that one hand and you're putting that on a belt or a corner of an object or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so an interesting note, I think, generally speaking, is that regardless of which type of malfunction we're talking about, type 1, type 2, or type 3, all of them involve racking a slide at some point.
Yes.
Like you're going to have to cycle the slide. So I think that there's something noteworthy about this. We're focused on a type 1 failure, but regardless of the failure, you're always going to have to rack the slide. And I think the takeaway from me here is hey, yeah, we have an industry best practice for this thing, but that may not make it the best thing for you. And having a pathway, a methodology that you can go test it with some legitimate analytical thing to actually determine which is better and which is not, that's where the real value lies. So like to go replicate your experiment, Riley, for me, right? Or for any person listening to this. Well, there's a couple ways it can be done. First, you could do it in live ammo with a shot timer. And you could, I guess you would need dummy ammo would be ideal. You'd feed dummy ammo into the mag
Right.
along with a couple of live rounds, and you'd go bang, bang, click, right? Perform whatever clearance you're testing in that moment, and then go bang. And then you're looking at the split time provided by the shot timer. Or you can do it in dry fire. To execute this in dry fire, you really need LASR software. And ideally, you need a laser cartridge, like the laser dot from Ready Up Gear, the one you were using, which for obvious reasons we're partial to. And because you need something that's measuring the time. In this case, it'd be LASR. But in order for LASR to measure that time, it needs the dot, from the shot to measure the shot. So those would be the tools someone would need to replicate this.
That's right. You could do it with a SIRT pistol, where you kind of more simulate the actions. But but you wouldn't want to do like a crazy ton of repetitions, like, hundreds or thousands of repetitions, because that may create some laziness in terms of like how tightly you actually grasp the slide, since you basically would be grasping the SIRT pistol slide and then allowing your hand to, slide off of it and sort of simulate the motion or whatever.
Well, you're also not getting any measurement relative to it actually working. I mean, if people go watch the Shooter Ready Challenge video,
I believe that you could prove out a lot of the same things I proved out by simulating that motion, the racking motion, because again, you're going to see differences in efficiency between how far your hand has to travel to, get off the grip, to slide, working slide, back on grip. But agreed, it's not ideal for testing this. I'm just saying, like if you're sitting there and you're like, well, I got a SIRT pistol and I got LASR, but I don't want to have to go buy a, Ready Up Gear laser dot trainer, which by the way aren't very expensive. They're very reasonably priced. There's ways you could at least simulate and work through the motions. But the better thing in your case would be, if you really want to test its effectiveness, test it live fire when you next go to the range.
Sure. Yeah.
Pick up, I think that as serious dry fire practitioners, it's good to have, a variety of tools that can serve different purposes. And that's absolutely been my belief for a long time. That's why I have SIRT pistols. That's why I have laser dot trainers. That's why I have cool fire trainer, even, and things of that nature. There's different tools for different purposes. So I can practice all these different things and in different ways.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid overview. And I think the other benefit, I guess I'll just throw out there, we're focused on type 1 malfunctions, but type 2 malfunctions are cleared the same way. So while the feeling, right, you're not getting a click, you're getting a dead trigger because the slide's not in battery in a failure to eject. But we're the clearance
stovepipes,
right.
We got typically spent brass that's stuck in the action of the pistol somehow.
Yeah, right. So your stovepipe, your type 2 failure, your whatever. I don't know if there's other words for that, but the clearance method is the same. We still generally, the industry teaches to tap and rack, and that it's the same thing as a type 1 failure. You obviously have a different stimulus to indicate you have a malfunction, but the clearance technique is the same. So this could equally apply there.
And I would go so far as to say that in the case of a failure to eject malfunction, it's almost even more relevant to not tap the magazine, because it's not the magazine the magazine not being seated is not the cause of that failure to eject in most cases. We're talking, you have a failure to eject, usually because the slide doesn't travel all the way to the rear, or doesn't travel to the rear with enough energy to reliably cause that piece of brass to hit the ejector and pop it out. That's usually where that failure to eject malfunction comes from. And it's quite often a function of an imbalance of sorts between ammunition power, how much power it generates to move that slide to the rear, and the resistance of that slide, both in terms of the weight of the slide and the stiffness of the spring, the recoil spring holding it forward. That's usually where those failures to eject come from. And so in that case, it almost even makes more sense to, in the case of a failure to eject, to just simply, grab the slide and pull it to the rear and clear the malfunction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I guess what am I trying to say? The other kind of, I'll call it age-old debate, in the malfunction world, and I know we've talked about it before, is that there's a group of people who are of the opinion that a person should diagnose the malfunction, figure out which one it is, and then immediately perform the clearance appropriate for that malfunction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other kind of group of people, which I think is probably the bigger group, as in my perception, of people who are kind of the opinion that, well, the vast majority of malfunctions are solved doing this thing. So just if you have a malfunction, do that. And if it doesn't work, then move on to this other thing that's going to clear the other malfunction.
I like automated processes built into the subconscious, because I think that makes life easier, simpler, more trouble-free, and easier to execute. At the same time, there are people that I trust significantly that are on both sides of that particular debate. As far as something goes awry, I'm going to check and see what the problem is and solve it, versus having certain automated processes, meaning that we have malfunction, immediately execute a so-called tap rack, or just a rack in my case, and then if that doesn't fix it, move on to the next thing. Because what I can tell you is that it's going to take me 0.5 to 0.6 seconds to just simply do a rack, versus if I actually stop and look and check gun and then go, oh, that's this versus that, and then apply the correct clearing, that's at least a second, and probably closer to 2. So yes, I like being practiced to a level where anytime gun doesn't go bang, I like to just rack the slide, try to clear the malfunction. And if that doesn't clear it, then it typically means like a failure to extract or type 3 type malfunction. And in that case, and I've got this episode's not about that, but I've got even more, I've got a more efficient way of solving that as well than the classic, lock slide back, strip mag, rack, put fresh mag or mag back in, rack, like that can be done very fast if you're well practiced, but there's still more efficient ways of
but the point is, that's another debate that can be solved with this kind of analytical approach. Because to kind of make it clear for those who don't understand what we're going at here, a type 3 malfunction has a different clearance method, right? Just a traditional tap rack won't clear it. A failure to extract the empty shell casing and then cycling a new round into the chamber, running into the back of the empty shell casing that's not supposed to be there, causes a malfunction that can't be cleared that way. And so the argument by some would be, well, if I perform my traditional tap rack clearance, find it doesn't work, and then move on to my type 3 failure clearance, then I've wasted unnecessary time. I could have saved that time by first just identifying that it was a type 3 failure and going directly to the type 3 clearance. Whereas the argument you're making, which is the camp I find myself in, is that the time it takes me to diagnose which type of failure I have is also wasted, and arguably that's slower than me just performing the type 1 clearance to begin with, and then determining that because it failed, I need to move on to the type 3 clearance anyway. So I think that's another thing that a person could use this analytical approach with LASR and dummy ammo. I'll come back to that in a moment, or live ammo LASR with laser cartridge, or live fire with a shot timer. Now, I think this would be an interesting test, Riley, to do sometime, because the way you'd want to do this is, in order to test it, you would need to not know what kind of malfunction you're going to have. So you would have a partner,
Sure.
right? And I would you'd give me 2 mags, and in one mag I would load dummy ammo, and the other mag I would load a Type 3 malfunction round. And you would blindly put one in the gun and not know what type of malfunction you're about to get. And that's how we would have to test that, so that you would determine. And that would be, then we don't really have LASR capabilities. So that would be difficult to test that in dry fire. But in live fire, we could run that test and see which is, which is faster, identification and then run proper clearance, or just run Type 1 clearance and then Type 2 if necessary, or Type 3 if necessary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that we've hashed this out, I think, pretty well. We've done it justice. I, again, encourage people to go view the video at shooterreadychallenge.com, the most recent one. In this case, it's titled Failure to Fire Malfunction, April 2021. It's okay to agree to disagree on some of these things. Like Mark here in the comments saying that he still likes a tap. That's okay. I mean, I think I've presented very sound logic as to the way I do things. At the same time, everything about this episode and everything about that Shooter Ready Challenge episode is to get you thinking about this, how we solve these malfunctions, giving you the tools to evaluate them in as objective of a methodology as possible in terms of measuring the data that comes out of these different techniques, and then evaluating it and selecting the best one for you. So that's what I hope you get out of this. I want shooters, and I kind of feel like this is my next phase in life as an instructor, is sort of like, let me present to you the principles, like the guiding principles, and the let me just kind of open the door to this world of discovery. Like, here's the guiding principles that kind of keeps you on the path, but now experiment and try things, and ultimately, find your own best technique. What matters the most is proficiency with technique and not specific techniques themselves. All right. As long as we're being intellectually honest with ourselves and not trying to justify things like if you have something that's significantly different time-wise, and I mean, unless you have really, really, really good reasons why you should go with the slower technique, you're probably just justifying, that you prefer this other thing, but without any real solid evidence or reason as to why. Does that make sense? And so be honest with yourself. To be honest, we need good data. We need to trust the data, and at the same time, we still have to look at the whole picture and how we operate as shooters and as gun carriers, and then pick the thing that works best for us.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. One thing I failed to mention earlier in the episode, and I intended to, there's actually 2 things, but first I want to give Bill Blowers at Tap Rack Tactical some credit, because it was a video that he did a few years back that first opened my eyes to the idea, because I was still stuck in the, tap rack. Well, why do you do tap rack? Well, you got to make sure the magazine's seated, and that kind of thing. And that's the way we've always done it, and it's just the right way. The truth of the matter is it's good to always challenge things that we've held as being the truth, even if it's been for decades. All right, because there are new and different and better ways of doing things that are discovered all the time. It's hard to imagine sometimes in the case of shooting a handgun, because we feel like we're at this pinnacle moment in history where, I mean, we have so many amazing examples of shooters that, like, it just feels like we've already tested and tried all these different things. But sometimes it's good to challenge assumptions. So I got to give credit to Bill Blowers. He's always teased a little bit about his company name being Tap Rack Tactical, when he now teaches or practices no tapping. But he's a good dude, and he's a really amazing instructor, and I can't recommend him. I've taken a class from him and can't recommend him any higher. The other thing is I meant to mention earlier at the beginning of the show, was a reminder, in case you missed episode 500, when we explained the not really format changes, but just a little bit of different way of doing the episode counts at this point. We got to episode 500, which is an amazing benchmark for us. We're really excited and happy and proud to have been able to stick with this for that long and still have people listening to us. Actually, the truth of the matter is more and more people listening to us every month, it seems. But it kind of felt like if we just keep counting up, it was just going to become a very unwieldy number. And it'd be cool to say episode 1000 one day, but following the example of a few other podcasts out there that are separating out their episodes and their content more into like a season type format, we elected as a team here to do that. So we are counting all first 500 episodes of season 1. All right. And from here on forward, we are now in season 2 and then season 3 and so on and so forth. And those seasons will change each quarter of the year. So when we hit the end of June, that'll be the end of season 2. And it'll be a little bit of a shorter season 2 than what is typical for like, say, season 3 and season 4 later this year will be a full 3 months. And we're starting at the beginning of May. So, but that's a little bit of a tweak. So from here on out, and part of that's just, we feel like that's going to help listeners make our content a little bit more digestible. I think some listeners that come into this a little bit late will not feel maybe as obligated to try to go back to episode 1 and go all the way through from the beginning, but maybe they'll be more inclined to be like, well, let's just go back to the beginning of season 2 and start from there, and so on and so forth. So that's the approach anyway. Let us know if you like or dislike that. Feedback's always nice, but I think that's what we're going to go with, especially now that we're actually, by the time this is published, we're kind of going to be somewhat,
we're committed.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been season 2, episode 1. I'll also mention that we'll play with this, and this is something certainly that could be changed a little bit, but my idea right now is that at the end of a season, we'll kind of recap a season and pull highlights from season 2 and season 3. And I think that'll be just a fun way of overviewing what we covered in a season. And, that way too, if someone's just getting started with the podcast and they're kind of in the middle of a season, hey, we'll do a recap and they can get the highlights. And if they just want to move forward with us from there, that is not a problem. That is A-okay. Anyway, so guys, it brings us to the end of another episode here. Again, today's episode is sponsored by Next Level Training. NextLevelTraining.com is where you can find them, makers of the fine SIRT pistols, and also LaserApp.com. That is LASRAPP.com. LaserApp.com, proprietors of the fine Laser X software, which is my software of choice for tracking metrics and data and results in dry fire practice. So with that, Jacob, any last words?
Malfunctions, they do happen.
Yes, they do. They do indeed. Well, later this afternoon, so a little preview, I'm really excited. We're going to have Steve Moses on a podcast. Steve Moses from Palisade Training Group. He's also one of our featured instructors at the 2021 Guardian Conference. He's an all-around great guy, but he's also a really excellent instructor and very smart and articulate in how he explains and describes things. And so I think you're really going to enjoy episode 2 of season 2 later today, to be recorded live here, guys. Again, if you like following us on Facebook or YouTube, we'll be right back here at 4 p.m. Mountain Time with Steve Moses. Until then, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe, so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.